With that, let's now get started with our luncheon speaker, again, generously sponsored by BWX Technologies. Colonel Doug Wheelock was selected by NASA to be an astronaut in 1998. Since then, Doug has accumulated more than 178 days in space. Doug flew on STS-120 in 2007, and in 2010 he served as a flight engineer for Expedition 24 and commander of Expedition 25. Wheels is also a dual-rated Master Army aviator and has logged more than 7,000 flight hours in 46 different rotary and fixed-wing aircraft and spacecraft. He's also an FAA-rated commercial pilot in single and multi-engine landcraft, rotorcraft, and gliders. With that, Doug, please come on up, and we welcome you for your talk. Thanks.
We are the explorers. We have a need to find what is out there. It is a drive inside each and every one of us. The drive to wonder, to push the boundaries, and to explore. We expanded across our lands, settling new frontiers. We took to the oceans and learned that we could cross treacherous expanses in the pursuit of discovery. And then we took to the skies and flew. But that wasn't enough. We left the planet and redefined what was possible. We flew in space. We walked in space. What once was a melodramatic flight of fantasy became reality. Then, a new generation of spaceships captured hearts and minds for 3 decades and helped build a castle in the sky that is our lasting home in space. We have always looked up. For centuries, we wondered what was on the other side of the sky, and we have begun to answer that question. We have learned that all the exploration humankind has achieved is only a beginning. Right now, men and women are working on the next steps to go farther than we have ever gone before. New vessels will carry us, and new destinations await us. Everything we have ever accomplished leads to this moment in time, where exploration will now take us to the planets and the stars. Our nearest neighbors in the night sky have beckoned us, invited us, dared us to reach for them. We are the explorers. Throughout our history, we have taken both small steps and giant leaps in that pursuit. Our next destination awaits. We don't know what new discoveries lie ahead, but this is the very reason we must go.
Thank you for the invite to join you today. Really appreciate it. My name is Doug Wheelock. Everybody calls me Wheels at NASA. Occasionally I get demoted to Tires. And just the other day, one of the schedulers in Houston called me Lug Nuts. So anyway, so it's great to be with you. I'm originally from upstate New York, and so I got to Ohio as quick as I could, just like John was saying the other day. But it's so exciting to be with you today because we are on a search for creative thought and innovation and young minds that are willing to reach out and design these new systems that's going to take us back to the moon. So I got a chance to fly on the Space Shuttle Discovery and then later on the Russian Soyuz, completely different experience. I lived and worked in space for almost 6 months back in 2010. And now I'm chairing the joint test panel for the landing. So I work in the astronaut office, but I'm on a search for, because our lander providers, which you probably have heard, SpaceX Starship, and now just recently the Blue Origin Blue Moon are our 2 lander designers. And of course they have subs as well. So, and some of you in this room may be subs to them. And we're very excited. One of the things that we saw though is a gap in our training, because how are we going to prepare to go back to the moon? And so under the requirements that are written for these landers, they are required to provide nothing beyond fixed space simulation. And as you all know, we during Apollo and during the space shuttle even, we try to follow the paradigm of basic to advanced to mastery level training. So when someone has reached the mastery level in simulation and in flight, they're ready to go to, as you remember, we had the LLTV, the Lunar Lander Training Vehicle. Actually, we had the Lunar Lander Research Vehicle first. We built 2 of those, and Neil Armstrong punched out of one of them and it crashed. The last remaining LLRV is in the museum out at Edwards Air Force Base. Then we built 3 LLTVs, the training vehicle, and we punched out of 2 of those. And all 3 of them smoking holes at Ellington Field in Houston. The last remaining LLTV is hanging from the Teague Auditorium in Houston. So if you're ever at Johnson Space Center and go into Building 2, look up and there's the last remaining LLTV hanging from the ceiling. And so our marching orders were like, let's not do that again, but let's build on Apollo. And of course, we have the gift of 50 to 60 years of advancement in technology. And so I'm an old grizzled veteran. I blinked and here I am like 25 years later. I was selected as an astronaut in August of 1998, 25 years ago next month. And I remember back in 4th grade, I was in 4th grade, I was 9 years old when we landed people on the moon on Apollo 11. It was during the summer, of course. But I knew at that time, I grew up in a very, very small farming community in upstate New York, just dairy farms and apple orchards. Anybody from upstate? So along the west side of the Catskills, just love that area up there. Actually, when we moved here, my wife is from the Akron area, or Doylestown, actually. And the first fall we were here, the fall of 2019, we were standing up at Huntington Beach Park on Lake Erie, and it was late October. The wind was cold coming off the lake, and the leaves were changing and falling. And she looked at me, she said, "I hope you still like it up here in the winter." And I said, "I'm from upstate New York, so you guys got nothing on us." But when I grew up in that little town, and I remember watching that on TV because nothing special ever happened in our town. And I want you to think back at your beginnings as well, where you grew up, the school you were in, things like that. And I remember going into 4th grade a couple months later, and we had a brand new teacher. Her name was Miss West, Christine West. And I don't remember anything else about 4th grade. But I do remember the first day she introduced herself and she said, "Who saw the moon landing?" And I raised my hand. She said, "One day you could do that too." And we all thought, this woman is nuts. She has no idea where she is at this tiny little farming community, this tiny little school. We had 15 people in my 4th grade class, one class in this tiny little school. And I thought, this lady is nuts. She has no idea where she is in this tiny little school. And as the years went on, I began to think to myself as I dreamed about flight. Went to one of the academies and came out and started flying. Went to the National Test Pilot School with Sean and Nadia Roberts way back in the early 90s, and then went from there to Pax River to the Naval Test Pilot School. And then coming out of there, I kept thinking back to myself, I wonder if Miss West was right, if like ordinary kids like me from these ordinary little schools could achieve things like this, being an astronaut or walking on the moon or flying jets, whatever it was that we have dreams about. And I was selected August 24th, 1998. I put on my brand new electric blue suit, no patches on it. I think I had my name tag and a NASA patch. And that following weekend, about 3 or 4 days later, we had the astronaut reunion, which we still have every 2 years. And all the old pioneers come back. And of course, at the time, a lot of the old Apollo astronauts were still with us. And we have a dinner that Friday night, and tables just like this. We had 8 to 10 at a table, and they put all the rookies with some of the seasoned veterans, And I was at a table with Neil Armstrong that night, and there were others, and a couple classmates of mine as well. But I was frozen because I kept thinking back, and to that moment that I watched him on the moon, and And I thought to myself, how did I ever get here, kind of thing. And it came for me to say something. I hadn't asked any questions and he told some funny stories. Most of what he was talking about was their tour around the world after they got back, and how enjoyable that was and how much fun they had. And so I wanted to know how he felt like as a superhero, extraordinary superhero. And because I remember how I felt as a little kid, and I was paralyzed in fear sitting next to him, But I asked him, I said, Mr. Armstrong, when you were on the moon, did you have a chance to just kind of deep breath and realize how profound a moment it was in human history, that nothing was going to be the same after that? And he sort of chuckled a little bit, and he said, I thought about the people that designed that rocket, how amazing that was that we even got to the surface. I thought about that catalyst bed when I pushed that button to go home. I hope that thing works, and hope they designed it right so we got one shot. I hope it goes. I stuck my thumb out at arm's length and covered up what I could see of the Earth. And then I thought to myself, how does an ordinary little boy from a small town in Ohio end up standing on the moon? And he sort of chuckled a little bit, and we all sort of laughed. And I thought to myself, that's a familiar story, because that's my story and that's your story. We're all really just ordinary kids from ordinary places. I'm sort of ashamed to admit that I found that out many years later, after Miss West told us that we could accomplish these things as well. And it was just such a profound moment for me that it really changed the course of my life. And I was, again, what brought me to the astronaut corps is I was a test pilot by trade, and then they built a spaceship with wings, and I'm thinking this is the place for me to come fly this space shuttle. So I kept thinking back at the old pioneers, and this is not me in flight school, by the way, but this is, I think John mentioned it yesterday, that the Wright brothers, this happened down in Kitty Hawk, but that dream first sparked in the minds of these young inventors in Dayton, Ohio, at a bicycle shop. Who would have ever thought? And, one day, it was about 4 years prior to the first flight, and Wilbur Wright stood up, he said, one day we're going to fly like birds, and everybody just laughed him out of the room. And then this happens, and now in North Carolina they have first in flight on the license plates, but here in Ohio we have the birthplace of aviation, because this is where that spark of an idea, that dream, first began. In 2007, I got a chance to go on the Space Shuttle Discovery. So Jim had mentioned I've flown a bunch of different rotorcraft, autogyros, gliders, jets, just everything. And most everything's in a museum now, including my spaceship. Spaceship Discovery is at the Smithsonian at Udvar-Hazy at Dulles Field. So if you haven't been there, and I actually haven't been able to get back there yet, it's just been a little. They've asked me to come to speak a couple of times, and I'm going to do that this summer, but haven't been back because I'm sure I'll get weepy when I see my spaceship sitting there in the museum. But it makes you think about how it's our turn now to turn over this and empower our young students. It's so good to see the interns here and the students that are here with us, because we're trying to turn over this legacy to you to carry onto the moon, sustained operations on the moon, and then onto Mars. And so this is what it felt like. I was very excited to get on the space shuttle. I had been a test pilot. I wonder what this is going to feel like. And this is the first minute or so of flight.
T-minus 16 seconds. Sound suppression water system has been activated, protecting Discovery and the launch pad from acoustical energy. We have a go for main engine start. T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of Discovery, hoisting harmony to the heavens and opening new gateways for international science. Discovery has cleared the tower.
Houston now controlling. Roll program.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
As a test pilot sitting on the front of this, I was curious of how it would feel. And in the ascent on the first stage, the vibration was so great, and the roll axis is about that external tank, And our little pink bodies are sitting in that shuttle, which has about a 20 to 25 foot moment arm. So when it rolls, it feels like you're on the end of a merry-go-round. Something that I remembered because we're designing our new craft to train in to get to the moon. And the SpaceX Starship has some large moment arms from where the crew is sitting to the axis of rotation. And Blue Origin, it's actually above where the crew is sitting. So it's going to be a trick trying to design these systems. But I got to space and I got a chance to look out and the beauty of our Earth. And during the daylight, of course, it's an explosion of color by day. And then but I found out right away that I got a chance to do a couple of spacewalks, and I found out right away that space has, and this is a view of my hometown, so you can see upstate New York, and I'm just over here in the forest on the right side of that picture, but you can see the Finger Lakes, looks like a bear's claws kind of scratched down through the state. And then, of course, here's us sitting here, and you can see Cleveland. This is kind of looking southwest, so you can see 4 of the 5 Great Lakes. And you can see Toronto, you can see Niagara River, Niagara Falls, and you can see Cleveland there as well, off in the distance. But then we were jolted into reality. We had an emergency on board. Scott Parazinski, my spacewalking partner, and I had done some work outside. We were assembling parts of the space station, and you might remember in the end of October of 2007, we had a solar array that we were trying to deploy, and it tore. And so we went on this odyssey out to fix this solar array, and it taught me so much about leadership, and that I hope that the leaders of industry that are in here, I know it's affected me, the way that we build teams and the way that we find strength in teams. I was terrified. And part of what we were trying to do at NASA is how to expose our in a controlled environment, our test pilots and astronauts, how to manage fear, how to manage failure. And we don't do that a lot in industry. We don't like doing that in school. We don't like failing. But at NASA, we do that every day in our practice and our simulation. We think about what is the next worst failure, and we practice that and practice and practice. It's very painful when you first get to NASA, but it pays dividends when you get to space and something happens like this. So this is Scott out on the external, on the robotic arm. And then you could see on this array, let me see if this laser pointer, yeah, right in here, you could see the cufflinks we made. We built these 5 sutures, and we sewed up that tear in the solar array. And it was crazy. I couldn't believe, I was so cold. I was down at the bottom of the array, and we repositioned the space station so it would be shadowed. So it wouldn't carry as much current down that strip, because you can't shunt that current until it gets down into the mast canister. And that current is carried on that, you could see a gold strip that's on the very edge of and it's 210 amps carried through that. And we're out there with metal tools. And so my heart was just like racing. And so I'm thinking, like, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard of. Not only have I done, but the craziest thing I've ever heard of. And so you could see this, actually this power strip is right here. And one of the first tests we had to do, this array was torn right here at this hinge line. And it was because there was a fray in the guide wire. There's a guide wire running down each side of these things. And there's a big fur ball in the middle of that guide wire. And it just caught on those grommets and just started unzipping the solar array. So we had a loose kind of cannon on deck, and a loose mass is like, you can't undock that shuttle, you can't redock any other craft. So if we can't get this fixed, we're going to have to take that array and kind of toss it away. And I'm thinking that's not a good solution either, because this provides our power for our space station, all of our science. And so we built these cufflinks. You can see 5 of them across here. They're just cables. They said, like, hey, go in behind this panel, you'll find some cable. Go behind this panel, you'll find some sheet metal and some tape, and just make some cufflinks. And they sent us up some dimensions, and I'm thinking, like, wow. And so I went back to my metal shop teacher when I got back to Earth, and I went in high school, and I went back and said, dude, everything I've ever needed to know to fly in space, I learned in your metal shop class. And so I was really grateful for that learning as well. But what it taught me in leadership, I was when Scott cut that guide wire. I'm right down here. I'm taking the picture sort of at arm's length, and that guide wire came screaming down here at, I think it was 10 meters per second was the retraction, because it had a very strong retraction reel. And so they said, be careful, grab onto that thing I had a 90-degree needle nose plier, so grab onto that thing and just hold it, and then just modulate it back into the reel so it doesn't come down the array and tear the array longitudinally as well. And then we don't want it to flop and they'll cut your suit. I'm thinking, like, what? It's like, so I was very careful about, and and so we finished the job. It took us 8 hours to do the spacewalk. And I thought I should take a picture of Scott. Although my hands were cold, I had a camera, and I looked up and I said, Scott, look down here, and I'm going to get a picture of you. So I think he raised his visor. Actually, he kept his visor lowered, which was great for me, because when you zoom in on the high resolution image, it's actually the first space selfie that I took of myself. So he looked down, and I caught a picture of him, and we got back. We landed on November 7th. This spacewalk was on November 3rd, 2007. We got back to Earth November 7th, 2007. And November 12th, 2007, Av Week came out. And this cover is worn out because I carry this with me. It's my lesson in leadership and how strengthen teams. So this is Scott, and this is a picture that I took of him and on the solar array. And so he comes into the office there in Houston. He throws this down. And he goes, dude, check it out. I'm on the cover of Av Week. I'm thinking, like, whoa. I said, I took that picture, So then I go to the cover photo. Astronaut Scott Parazynski rides a makeshift crane cobbled together from the International Space Station robotic arm in the most daring spacewalk, and blah, 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 blah. Photo courtesy of NASA. And so my first lesson for you in your teams, whether it's in your business, large or small, in school, as interns on your teams, because this is a team environment here. Teamwork makes the dream work at NASA. There's no room for a lone ranger in this business. And so when I looked at that, my initial human reaction was like, dang, I took that picture. I was like, and I thought to myself, how amazing when we can, as a team, what we can achieve and the things we can do if we don't care who gets the credit. And I thought to myself, what a team victory this was, and but a lesson in leadership to me, and a lesson in being a team leader as well. So I hope it's a lesson for you as well. Let's see if we can. So I want you to watch this. Down in the bottom, you'll recognize this. 2009 in January. Down in the bottom, you see altitude,
every day.
Altitude and airspeed. And this is the Miracle on the Hudson. And so,
July 2760, climb maintain 10,000.
10,000, July 2760.
the communication up on the left is the communication inside the cockpit.
Cactus 15.9, turn left lane 270.
This is Cactus 1539. Hit birds to false thrust on focus. It's returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220.
220.
Take a look at the altitude down at the bottom as well.
It's 1529. He bird strike. He lost all engine. He lost the thrust in the engine. He's returning immediately.
Cactus 1529. Which engines?
He lost thrust in both engines. He said.
Got it.
Cactus 1529. We can get it to you. Do you want to try to land runway 13?
We're unable. We may end up in Hudson.
So George
Showing
Washington,
2760, turn left 070.
George Washington Bridge here. Big open runway right here. So we're going to talk about it in just a minute.
Hi, Cactus 15.9. It's going to be left traffic to runway 31.
Unable.
Okay, what do you need to land? Cactus 15.9. Runway 4 is available if you want to make left traffic to runway 4.
I'm not sure we can make any runway. What's over to our right? Anything in New Jersey? Maybe Teterboro?
Okay, yeah, off your right side is Teterboro Airport. Do you want to try to go to Teterboro?
Yes.
Teterboro, Empire, actually, LaGuardia Departure Guy, emergency inbound.
Hey, guys.
Cactus 1529 over the George Washington Bridge, wants to go to the airport right now.
What's going on, airport? Check. Does he need assistance?
Yes, it was a bird strike. Can I get him in for runway 1?
Runway 1, that's good.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280, you can land runway
Perfect.
1 at Teterboro.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in Hudson.
I'm sorry, say again, Cactus? Alright. Kelly 2760, contact New York 126.8.
2680, Joey 276.
Cactus 15.9, radar contact is lost. You also got Newark Airport up at 2 o'clock in about 7 miles. Eagle 5 4718, turn left thing 210.
210, 4718. I think he said he was going in the Hudson.
Cactus 1529, you saw him? Cactus 1529, if you can, you got runway 29 available at Newark, will be 2 o'clock in 7 miles. Eagle 5 4718, climb maintain 2000.
Okay, 1000 and 5, please.
Eagle 5 4718, I'm sorry, I missed that, say again?
And we're up to 12,289.
Okay, thank you. Eagle 5 4718, turn left 220.
204718.
And of course, we know it was a happy ending for the crew and the passengers on board this flight. So this is the folks getting onto the wing. Everyone was saved, and quite an amazing story. And then the jet hauled back into the. And so what it gave to me, this happened in January 2009 when I was training to be commander of the station. And so once the NTSB investigations and all, we had Captain Sullenberger come to talk to our astronaut corps about leadership in the cockpit, leadership on teams, and the management of fear, and how the importance of preparation. When I first started on this landing, designing the lunar lander and the training for the lunar landing, I ran into a lot. We got a lot of great simulation these days, a lot of great VR, AR, artificial intelligence. We got it all right at our fingertips. And so I was asked the question initially, it's like, why can't we just do this all and prepare to land on the moon with just straight simulation? And I use this example because if you were to go to the airport and on your commercial flight, and someone said to you, "Hey, congratulations, your flight crew today, your captain and your first captain and the captain, first pilot, have never flown this aircraft. They've got 10,000 hours in the simulator, but they have never flown this aircraft. I think you would probably wait to the next flight." And we don't have that luxury going to the moon. And so when I mentioned those things and showed this to leadership, it's like, okay, we need to fix this. We need to make sure that we have motion-based simulation and fixed-based simulation. So then I got a chance to go, after talking to Captain Sellerberger, and I got on a Russian Soyuz and headed off to the International Space Station. And this is what I dreamed I would be doing. Just taking pictures all the time, because the Earth is so beautiful, and the Earth against the backdrop of space, just breathtaking. And but this is what I was actually doing most of the time. This is why we practice failure at NASA. And in your test teams, regardless of the size of your company, in your test team, make sure that you include in your rigor the ability for your folks to design and test just to the limits of where the failure is, and help them to map that out. Don't be afraid of the failure points. Reduce the risk as much as you can to find those boundaries, how we can really expand what we know. This is the potty on the space station. I was a test pilot on board with two brilliant women PhD scientists, Tracy Caldwell Dyson, who's going back to the space station here next year, and Shannon Walker, who's currently the deputy chief of the astronaut office. And so they're both PhD scientists, and I was doing science one day, and Shannon tapped on my shoulder. She said, "Hey, the potty's broken." And I'm like, "We got to fix the potty. We're up here for 6 months, and we got to fix that potty." She said, "If you fix the potty, I'll do all of your science for the rest of the day." So we did the 0G high five, and it took me about an hour and a half. But this is what the inside of the potty looks like. I fixed that potty, and I fixed it over the next several months. I fixed it 2 or 3 or 5 more times, and I figured out, if you're on a spaceship like locked away with a crew, and you could fix the potty, you are a guardian of the galaxy. So, yeah. Now we're off to. I got back from that mission. I'm going to show you some pictures here shortly, but now we are on a new mission. This is our Artemis mission, and you guys probably know that in Greek mythology, Artemis was a twin sister of Apollo, and also goddess of the moon as a side gig, right? So our mission back to the moon is called Artemis, and so this is the big rocket. We already had Artemis 1, of course. This is the big rocket rolling out. This is what it looks like on the launch pad, just to the scale of the Saturn V and more powerful than the Saturn V. It's quite amazing. I was fortunate to be down there at the Cape for this first launch, which was last November. And so it was uncrewed. And so our next mission, Artemis 2, will go out around the moon. And then Artemis 3 is scheduled to be our landing, our first lunar landing. And so we're very excited about this mission. So they assigned me in 2020. I finished up my work here at Glenn. Actually, I came up and I see Mary back there. I worked for Ruben. I was the associate director of aeronautics for strategy, I think, for Ruben, and worked a lot with Mary and Tim McCartney. And then for about 6 months, and then they put me over in, it used to be Plumbrook Station, but I see General Stringer back there, and I spent 6 months out there with him when the Artemis 1 article was here during testing. And so great experience up here at Glenn, and then we're in COVID. And so they said, like, "Hey, we're shut down here." And I called down to Houston. It's like, "We're shut down here too. How would you like to lead the joint test panel going back to the moon?" And I said, "I could do that. I'd like to do that." And so the first thing I did was, and I have a co-chair on this panel. It's like, "Hey, we're going back to the moon. You have no budget. You have no authority, but figure out what it's going to take to build this training strategy to take an astronaut right out of astronaut candidate training to new, fresh astronaut polished wings, and have them fly a craft and land it on the moon, and then come back home safely to Earth." So you need to build that strategy. So the first thing we did is we went back to the archives to dig out all the old Apollo debriefings, and we met with at the time. Since then, that was in 2020. We've met with Dave Scott, Apollo 15. Charlie Duke from Apollo 16, Harrison Schmitt from Apollo 17, and of course Buzz, from Apollo 11, just to kind of pick their brains. And I looked at all their debriefings, and I wanted to show you the last minute of before the landing, and you're going to hear two voices in here. Neither one of them Neil Armstrong's voice, and it's going to play a little bit into how we prepare our crews, because he was task saturated with what he was seeing and the visual illusions he had as well. So you hear Buzz's voice, and you hear Charlie Duke, who later walked on the moon on Apollo 16, but he's the Capcom. And you hear Charlie Duke say 60 seconds and 30 seconds. That's how much fuel they have left. So here we go, the last minute of the Apollo 11 approach.
60 seconds. Lights on. Down 2.5. Forward. Forward. 40 feet down 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward. 4 forward. Drifting to the right a little. 6. Down 1/2. 30 seconds forward. Drift. 8. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. APA at a descent. Nose control both auto. Descent engine command override off. Engine arm off. 413 is in. We copy you down, Eagle. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
And I think Neil Armstrong started breathing again there too. But you don't hear his voice, and it gave us some clues into their training, because only the commanders got a chance to fly that LLTV, because there was so much risk in flying that. The pilots never flew that, so Buzz didn't get a chance to fly that, but the commanders did as well. And so the outbriefing from the visual illusions and the control of that vehicle in lunar dynamics, lunar physics, and now F still equals ma, but the A is a lot different, and there's no air to bite into. So typically in our flying machines here on Earth, we compensate for those things, of course. And so now our challenge is to develop systems like motion-based simulation and in-flight simulation to be able to try to replicate how a vehicle would maneuver in lunar space. And so this is kind of our goal. We started out as boots on the moon in 2024. That's not going to happen, but we're looking at boots on the moon in 2026 now. And we went out to industry. We released an RFI in 2020. Hey, we're going to the moon. Who wants to join us? And it went to industry and commercial enterprise and academia. Who wants to build motion-based simulation platforms, augmented reality, and then infusion into a flight vehicle, a variable stability vehicle as well. Just like during Apollo, we had rudimentary simulation, and very rarely did the crews get to train together in simulation. In fact, Charlie Duke was just with us in Houston about a month or so ago, and he was saying how the simulator at KSC was much better because it was up to date and configuration control. The one at JSC he said it didn't even really work, and it wasn't really, we didn't have the systems integrated. So I was like, okay, that's part of what we're trying to do in training, to make sure that if we have a flight vehicle, if we have a motion-based simulator, if we have motion-based hexapod-based motion simulators and then fixed-based simulation, how do we make that all, the experience have some continuity there, so we can bridge this gap to learn to train on the moon. Of course, for Apollo, we had an in-flight trainer, the LLTV, and then for the space shuttle, we had the shuttle STA, the shuttle training aircraft that replicated the shuttle descent in handling qualities and control response on the descent. So we went off to the races, and these are our first recommendations to NASA headquarters and to so we are, in fact, this evening at I got to make sure I stay within my time because I have a 4:30 flight out to Colorado for HATS, and we're putting all of our astronauts through HATS training. One of the things that jumped out to us, first of all, we're going to the South Pole of the moon, which is undulating terrain, very similar to the Rockies and the LZs that we have found out in high altitude in Colorado. And we're going to have very low incidence of sunlight because we're at the South Pole. So we're usually something below 15 degrees, and even less. So we'll have large shadows. And one of the things that all of the Apollo crews told us is like, man, you're going to have to figure out a way to judge your descent rate, closure rates, known size of objects, and overcome visual illusions that you're going to encounter. So what we're doing is we're looking at advanced training in power and energy management, which is a helicopter at above 12,000 feet is not real happy up at those altitudes. As any helicopter pilots in here, but you know that it's not real responsive at that altitude. So it's going to be very similar to what we're going to be facing. And so we have and we expose our crews to visual illusions and also LZ hazard avoidance and LZ redesignation, landing zone redesignation. So we are implementing the HATS course, and this is through the Colorado Air National Guard. And we've put a number of crews through, and actually SpaceX has joined us. They joined us back in May to take a look at what it's like to try to guide a vehicle down into a remote LZ with only using a 1 meter resolution satellite image, which is what they intend to use at the South Pole. So very difficult and very challenging. The next is the Kraken. So you see the patch there. I got my Release the Kraken patch. It's not on my flight suit because NASA hasn't authorized me to wear that. When I go to Wright-Patterson, though, I wear it. But that's me with my Release the Kraken patch. This is a contract we have currently through HLS program, partnering with HRP, Human Research Program at NASA. We are in a developmental stage of developing the Kraken. It's actually known as the DRD, the Disorientation Research Device. You could look it up on Google, or you could put in Release the Kraken, and you'll probably see videos there online. It actually belongs to NAMRU, Dayton, but it's there in place at Wright-Patterson. And we currently use the centrifuge there at Wright-Patterson as well. So we're finding a home for astronaut Artemis mastery level training here in Ohio. So, which is the next slide I'm going to get to. So we've employed NASA Langley to be our repository for software and simulation upgrades and any kind of changes that we have, so they can maintain the configuration of all of our training platforms. And so we took that advice from Charlie Duke and others that said, like, man, you better lock this down or you're going to find yourself in a pickle when you get back to the moon. So we're doing our best, dead level best. And so this is where we need interns, students. If you're interested in the area of flight simulation, electrical engineering, computing, writing code, we need flight architecture algorithm designers to help us in the Kraken. We're going to make this thing fly like it's on the moon. And so we did our first, down at the bottom right is right after our first test flight. That was open loop, so no manual control. But we flew the Apollo 15 approach, which was coming over a large kind of mountain range and then just littered with craters, and then the Hadley Ridge coming down through the that we had to avoid going into as well. So it was a very challenging approach on Apollo 15, and so we're using that as our baseline run in the Kraken. And of course, we are looking at in-flight simulation, and these are the words that I can tell to you today, because we do have some things that are in work with the Air Force, and we're working very closely with the Air Force Research Lab on designing a new sort of Artemis level LLTV. So something, and we've got our eyes on some eVTOL platforms, electronic, and NASA Glenn happens to be the NASA Center of Excellence for electrified aircraft propulsion and also space propulsion. So I just talked to Jimmy. He had to leave. He had to go to a budget meeting. So I told him, I told him I'm glad it's you and not me, Jimmy. He said I don't want to ride on a rocket. So, but we're working with Glenn and General Stringer out at ATF to see if we can find a home for one of these vehicles as we do the initial flight testing. So. So that's underway, and we start a joint flight test with the Air Force out at Edwards Air Force Base at the end of this year. So we're very excited about this. And this is what Apollo did. You see some images here. There's Neil Armstrong in a kind of a fixed base, like high fidelity simulator. Then of course the gantry at Langley. This gantry is still there, by the way. I was just at Langley last week, and I was like, oh, there's the gantry. I hadn't seen it in a while. It's still standing there. And then of course the unwieldy craft there on the right, the LLTV. And then of course Neil Armstrong got a chance to. Now I'm going to play this for you. This actually happened on May 6, 1968, so just barely a year before he flew to the moon. It was one of his flights in the LLRV, and this is the one he punched out of. But you can watch the progression and how rudimentary. This is the very first fly-by-wire vehicle ever designed, and so here we go. This is Neil, and word is that this happened like late in the morning, and he was back at his desk like within an hour or something like that. And they were looking for him. The medical people were looking for him. Oh, he's at his desk working. So here we go. Neil Armstrong. It's tough going right there. And so we were instructed to, so we released an RFI in 2020, said, hey, we're trying to come up with a variable stability vehicle. So I've listed them here on the left, very cloaked over there, but you can see we're looking at 3 different VTOLs. We also looked at a simulation pod underneath a helicopter, and also the Army Rascal, which is a variable stability helicopter as well. So, and here's what we graded. And so the 2 VTOLs at the bottom there are kind of our leading candidates. And so we're going to be looking hard at the eVTOL environment coming up in the near future. So if you're interested in work on these electrified vehicles, we want you to come help us get back to the moon. So back to pictures from space, and I'll kind of leave you with some closing thoughts here, but just some of the drama of looking out the windows. Of course, the atmosphere here is just thin as a razor. It's just kind of crazy. The way this is the island of Great Britain and Ireland here. Actually, London's down here underneath the clouds, of course, down there. Sorry. And this is actually the Great Barrier Reef off the eastern coast of Australia, which kind of looks like a tree, and it's but just the brilliance of the colors of our ocean and the colors of our planet during the day are just striking. The Nile River snaking up through you could see where the water sources are. We flock to the Nile River, and of course the fertile delta of the Nile up by the Mediterranean as well. Right in the center view there are the pyramids. I tried so hard because the contrast is so low, and this is with a huge zoom lens, but you can see the pyramids there. I finally was able to capture that. I'm not a photographer, but space kind of forces you to become one, so very difficult to track these things. But this is actually in India. This is the Taj Mahal right here, down here on the bend in the river. It's the Taj Mahal there. I tried to get Taj Mahal and finally got it one day. Ayers Rock, which reminds me of what we're doing on the moon, going back with the low contrast, because so difficult to pick out in the Australian outback that I really had to gauge on the shadow, because otherwise everything's sort of blended together. And so it's a good lesson for us designing craft and vision systems and sensors to go back to the moon as well. A volcano kind of tearing through a cloud layer and carrying it into the stratosphere. A hurricane from space. Just amazing. Some of these Big storms are hundreds of miles in diameter. It's just really amazing. The island of Madagascar, we were doing some studies, some science studies to help them reforest the inner part of the island of Madagascar. Some of the places that I was able to see, and this is one of them, Patagonia, the glaciers in Patagonia. I don't know if anybody's had a chance to go down there. I've never been there, but I dream of this place because of all the great views from the space station. We were down over the southern part of South America. Then the sun goes down every 45 minutes, by the way. So we're orbiting once every 90 minutes. So every 45 minutes we get a sunrise or a sunset. And during the day, a day past, the Earth is like alive and like this explosion of color. And then at night, it's like an explosion of light and motion with the aurora. Actually, the Milky Way and light. That's a lightning bolt on the surface of the Earth, that kind of lighting up the clouds. There you can see some familiar cities there. Here's Chicago, Cleveland over here, Detroit. So the mosaic of our city lights, our towns and cities and small villages kind of dot the landscape. The peninsula of Florida. And then Italy really looks like a boot from space. And so it's lit up. And here you can see, I found this fascinating. Actually, down here you can see Mount Etna. So you can see the little red dot in there, that active volcano. And then up here in Naples, you can see also a dark area. It's circular area, that's Vesuvius. And so I took a picture of that. I was like, wow, those lights are really close to Vesuvius, which is a dormant volcano, by the way. And so I took a picture. I thought, like, how smart we are as humans building up the side of this dormant volcano. I don't know if I'd be building there, but like Pompeii is buried down here somewhere, you know. So the ancient city of Pompeii. So just amazing things you could see from the space station. Then this, of course, are our city lights along the eastern seaboard. The Nile River snaking up through the Sahara again. Again, you could see the water sources, the oases through the Sahara Desert. And then you could juggle in space. You could be a master juggler. You could also be a Cirque du Soleil kind of candidate, you know, balancing heavy things on your nose. And then, of course, everything floats in space. This is my buddy Scott Parazynski that is on the cover of this magazine. And then me and our pilot, George Zamka. This is Shannon and I on the Soyuz on the way to the moon, trying to eat some our first introduction to Russian food in orbit. And interesting. And then sleeping in the space station. These are our crew quarters. And of course, you could sleep on the ceiling, on the floor, on the walls. And this is the walls of the, and I was sleeping on the ceiling of the space shuttle. And I got up and I thought, like, ooh, this looks a little creepy. Kind of like a Stephen King movie or something. So your arms float in space when you fall asleep. And this is a little bit what happens to fluids in space. This is water, which we have to be really careful of, but the surface tension in water. So all of the fluids that we're investigating on board the space station have this very same and variable surface tensions. And a lot of our science is done using water. And of course, a lot of our stupid astronaut tricks are used for this, using water as well. read is demonstrating the surface tension. You could see there's such high tension that the smaller blobs of water just bounce off of that. They can't even get near that larger planet there. So. Here's a little physics experiment for you guys, the physics majors. And you can see it's kind of like the consistency of Jell-O, you know, it's water in space. And so this is Alex. He demonstrated. I like this one from the back. It looks like a alien coming over top of his head. So. Crazy astronaut tricks. And it's time to come home. And so I called my mom. I said, "Mom, we're coming home." And she said, "How will I know that you're okay?" Because we're going to land in Kazakhstan and underneath a parachute on land. And I said, "I'll send you a sign." She goes, "I need some sort of sign that you're okay." So we got in, and I had a window seat. And this is what it looks like out the window. Your spaceship coming apart, essentially. You'll hear the alarms going off, but essentially your heat shield is sort of disintegrating and sloughing off, and so they build in the thickness just enough to get through the atmosphere. And so it's quite a wild ride, and I needed to send a sign to my mom that I was okay, so I had a sign in the LZ. So I want to leave you with one last thought, because it was a number of years later, I think it was 2015, when we sent, this is Pluto, of course, and this is my favorite picture of Pluto. And who thinks Pluto should still be a planet? Wow, we got a good crowd. Okay, we got a good coalition here. Me too. And I wanted to share with you kind of my mission now, because after this mission, this New Horizons mission to Pluto, when these images came back, I got this letter, and I'm going to see if I can read it here on the board. I'll read it to you. "Hello, my name is Ollie. I'm 6 years old, and I am learning about the solar system. I was wondering about Pluto. Could you please make Pluto a planet again? I really think he just needs more time to clear his orbit. Earth had a chance, so we should give Pluto a chance too. Please think about it. Little guys are important too. Thank you, Ollie." And so I wanted to leave this with you, because I wanted to read something, because the being ordinary is such an amazing thing. I was so blessed to get this letter, and I kept in contact with Ollie, by the way, who's like 13 now, I think so. But I lost my dad a few years ago, and on his nightstand he had this little poem, and I wanted to share this with you. And it's about being ordinary, because the fact is that we're all ordinary kids from ordinary places with dreams that are extraordinary, and we're just waiting for our life to intersect with these extraordinary opportunities. I'm so excited to see the interns and the students here, because I wish I knew this when I was your age, but this is about being ordinary, the same way Neil Armstrong felt. It was the same way I felt. It's called Make the Ordinary Come Alive. Do not ask your children to strive for extraordinary lives. Such striving may seem admirable, but it is the way of foolishness. Help them instead to find the wonder and the marvel of an ordinary life. Show them the joy of tasting tomatoes and apples and pears. Show them how to cry when pets and people die. Show them the infinite pleasure in the touch of a hand, and make the ordinary come alive for them. The extraordinary will take care of itself. With that, I need to go catch a plane to Colorado. I don't know if I have time for a couple of questions, or thank you so much for your attention. And it's a real pleasure being with you. I really appreciate the invite. The future is so bright for us, you know. And to students and interns, I kind of wish I feel like I missed my wrinkle in time. I wanted to share, I was reading, just one more thing, Jim, I'm sorry. I'm reading First Man, so it's the biography of Neil Armstrong. In chapter 6, it talks about aeronautical engineering 101. And the author writes, on October 14th, 1947, 1 month after Armstrong started at Purdue University, an Air Force test pilot, one with whom Armstrong would later fly, broke through the mythical sound barrier. The name of the hotshot flyer was Captain Charles E. Chuck Yeager, and the revolutionary airplane he piloted beyond Mach 1 was the rocket-powered Bell X-1. Neil began to reflect on that. He goes, you know, all I thought about, he says, for Neil, however, this new era in flight dawned bittersweet. By the time I was old enough and became a pilot, things had changed. People had flown across the oceans, over the poles, and to the corners of the earth. All these things had been accomplished. I resented that. All in all, for someone who was immersed in, fascinated by, and dedicated to flight, I was disappointed by the wrinkle in history that had brought me along one generation too late. I had missed all the great times and adventures in flight. Just imagine, you know, how Neil Armstrong felt that day, and how many times in our life and in our journey we feel the very same. You know, that our wrinkle in time is come or gone, and we've been looked over because we get impatient waiting for that extraordinary opportunity. So anyway, I wanted to leave those thoughts with you. Thank you so much. This is a real blessing to be here with you guys. I love Cleveland, and my wife and I still live here most of the time, and I go back and forth to Houston. She asked if she could please not have to go back to Houston. So at this time of year, it's treacherous down there. So I'll tell you, a Houston summer makes you long for a Cleveland winter. So anyway, thank you very much.